How is it possible that the Nephilim were there right before the flood, but then after the flood, we read that they were there again?
And what the angels are doing here is they are creating a spurious race that is larger, stronger, and more gifts that, in terms of powers and capabilities, than humans, and they're going to dominate the world. They're going to take over the governments and the kingships and the armies, and they're going to enslave humankind. And we're going to see this somehow show up again after the flood.
These are actually obstacles to a lot of young people out there who look at the aliens and they look at all these other cultures like the Greeks with gods and demigods, and how do all of this fit in with the Bible?
How little a lot of Christians know about the Bible. In fact, polytheists, particularly in the secret societies, know more than Christians, and they use that advantage to seed and wedge faith issues. The angels have created demigods, heroes of old, as we would understand that in Greek, the mighty ones of renown. We have both Old and New Testament testifying, and many other examples. They can take a bodily form, and they can take a form of their choosing and size. And so when they take that form, they now create DNA. And when they reproduce, they're going to pass on some of that. Giants are told in all cultures all around the world. They just have different names. So there's only 3 ways giants can show up after the flood. Now, Gilgamesh is even larger as a post-Diluvian giant, 6th generation after the flood, versus the Gilgamesh in the Book of Giants before the flood. King of Uruk, and he is 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide. These are monsters. Moses describes these giants in a unique way, and he lists a number of giant tribes like the Hori. The secret societies say that Nimrod is the first grand master of ancient masonry after the flood, and he writes the first post-Diluvian constitution for the Masons, who uses this knowledge to introduce the Babel religion, which is the Enochian mysticism from before the flood. And Babel is the root word for Babylon, as it's used in the New Testament for the Babylon religion of the end time.
Fascinating how they build those secrets in line with the stars, and how they read it, how they understood it with all this knowledge and perverting it, astronomy into astrology.
Not only does he use the days of Noah, it's going to be like that, but also the days of Lot. Now, that's destruction by fire. So it's linking fire to the destruction of Sodom to the end time destruction.
It's all connected.
Knew the giants were roaming around, and they gathered together as one people to build a city and a tower. But where did that knowledge come from?
Hey guys, welcome back to DLM Lifestyle. Today we're going to talk about how it is possible that the Nephilim were there before the flood, but also after the flood, and how many there were with all the tribes of them. And people don't realize how many there were because it's not being preached in a lot of churches today. And it's important because it connects to the end times. Now, I'm not talking about this alone today. Actually, I brought in someone that can share all his knowledge with us, Gary Wayne. Welcome, Gary. Thank you for being here with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me to your show, and so much looking forward to the topic today and communicating with your audience and maybe talking about some things that they may not be aware of, or if they are aware of, a lot more information on that topic than that they would be aware of. So what I find is most people have maybe a superficial understanding at best, but people don't really understand because it's not taught, as you mentioned, in the churches, prehistory as a whole and its context. And the context of prehistory is our raison d'etre, our reason of being, and where we're going. And so it sets the table for what happens in the Bible. The first 10, 11 chapters is the Rosetta Stone to understanding everything that unfolds into the Bible. So the giant and Nephilim story is a significant part that's with us even to this day and right through to the end time.
Right. Allow me to explain to people who you are, for those of you who might not know him. Gary Wayne, he spent 45 years researching biblical prophecy, history, and mythology, and uncovering the interesting mysteries of the Bible, Gnostic scriptures, the Quran, the Bhagavad Gita and Rig Vedas, the Popol Vuh, Epic of Gilgamesh, Ugaritic texts, and other ancient epics. I mean, even language etymology and secret society publications. Now, of course, me and Gary, we believe in the Bible 100%. We believe it's God's inspired word, but we do look at all these sources to see how it connects with the Bible. And then he published 2 books that I have here with me today. The first one is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan to enslave humankind. The second one is the Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, how understanding prehistory and giants helps define end-time prophecy. I'll add it for you guys in the video description down below. Now, Gary, I think we need to start here. And I just want to add this, that there's a lot of Christians out there that is scared of this topic, but you should not be scared. We should not be scared of the truth. And these are actually obstacles to a lot of young people out there who look at the aliens and they look at all these other cultures like the Greeks with gods and demigods, and how do all of this fit in with the Bible? And so that is why we talk about these things. So maybe we can start here, Gary. How is it possible that the Nephilim were there right before the flood, how it became so evil, and then the flood happened? But then after the flood, we read that they were there again. But a lot of people think, how is it possible? Because the flood wiped them all away. So I'll give it to you.
Yeah, so it's really important to sort of understand that, the Adamites are created as a resolution to the angelic rebellion. And God knows as Alpha, Omega, everything that's going to happen and all the free choices that everybody's going to make. But he also knows how those who don't want to be loyal to God, and starting with the fallen angels, are going to react. So none of this is a surprise, and it's all part of what I would call the resurrection sequence to make us like angels in the end time. And so we need to understand our relationship to the angels and our relationship to their spurious offspring. And if people aren't familiar with that spurious term, you can use it a few ways: as illegitimate, but in this case, illegitimate children. So in Genesis 6, and when I first ran across this, I didn't want anything to do with this because I was researching prophecy, and I wanted to just deal with the prophecy. So I'm running across the sons of God who are going to see the daughters of children, and they're going to produce giants. According to the KJV and other English translations, the word's going to be Nephilim, which is the Hebrew word plural for giants. And so the singular would be Nephil. And so I said to myself, whatever that is, I don't want anything to do with it. That's not what I'm here to do. And I'm just going to leave it alone. But as I kept logging the prophecy narratives in the Bible, I keep running across these groups of peoples. And there's a connection to the evil spirits, and there's a connection to the fallen angels, and there's a connection to end time prophecy. And I'm thinking, I can't really ignore this, even though this just sounds absolutely crazy to me. And you have this cognizant dissonance that, like, why would the Bible be talking about giants? I thought I'd better log it. And that's how I kind of got interested in it. And it took me a while to become comfortable with it. But it is so important to understand this is part of our history, part of how we got to where we are, and part of where we're going. So when we look at the sons of God in Genesis 6, you may hear that they're not giants. I mean, they're not angels, but indeed they are angels. And biblically, from an Old Testament perspective, in Job 1 and 2, 1, 6, 2, 1, and 34, 4 through 7, the sons of God are described as angels who present themselves on a regular basis to God at the throne of God in heaven. And that in Job 38, they're celebrating with the morning stars, another order of angels. And this is at the time of creation. So these are not humans. And these are part of the sons of the Most High, who rule in the council of the gods in Psalms 82. And it's almost the exact same language in Hebrew. Instead of just being Ben Ha Elohim, this is going to be Ben Ha El Elyon.
Yeah. And I just want to add that verse scares a lot of even pastors and preachers. Psalm 82 that says that you are gods, and they're like, oh, but there's just one God, and how do we explain this? Didn't want to interrupt there. Sorry.
Well,
Go.
the Hebrew word for God in the singular is El, in the
Right.
superlative sense for the God Most High, Elyon. And so when we look at what other meanings are applied to it, it also means mighty. You can be, and it is used in the Hebrew for some words about mighty, and it's used for an angel and or a god. So the application in the Hebrew is very, very important. And so I use the Hebrew ha there as the, not a God, the God, right? And that's how we want to make that distinguish. And so it's common for Hebrew words, just like the English language, you can have multiple meanings, some very similar in nuance, but some distinctly different.
Yeah.
And so we should not be afraid that these are called sons of God. And some ministers, are uncomfortable with that because they look at Jesus as the Son of God, but he's greater than that. He's the one in Colossians 1 and John 1. He's the one who creates all things, including the angels that are shown in the creation in Psalms 104.
So he's not just a son of God, he's the Son of God. That's why when later the language changed to angels as well, he's not just a angel, he's the angel of the Lord when he appears to people in the Old Testament.
Yeah. And for Muslims who might be listening, not the physical Son of God, because his spirit is, possesses the oiketerion, the dwelling place for a spirit, a soul, and the body that's created in Mary. And he becomes flesh, as John talks about. And so he is the branch of God. He is the servant of God. He is the right hand of God. He is the word of God, which is the theos, which is the logos of the theos. And this cognate, as you see him show up in the Old Testament, as Jehovah of the Elohim, or Lord God. And he's shown in Genesis 1 creating with, when Elohim speaks, Elohim Amar, that means the word is there in speak. Because when God commands, he creates through the word, and the Holy Spirit, the Ruach of the Elohim, is also there in Genesis 1:2, which also has a part in creation as well. So they're all present there. And we're introduced to Jehovah Elohim in Genesis 2:4, Lord God, as it's, I think, poorly translated, but that's my opinion. I would prefer a direct translation there. So we need to understand that these are angels. And there are rebellious angels, as the Bible talks to us about. And these are not the sons of God for the New Testament. That is a promise that comes in Acts 2 through the resurrection. And that will be adopted as heirs by Jesus, as his brothers, through the resurrection process. And there's several resurrections that will be coming in the end time for the saints. And that we will become like gods, even though we have human fathers. So there's a distinction. It's a prophecy. And so people who are looking at the book of Isaiah and Hosea, that are looking at the children of God, as Israel has talked about, that's a prophecy for the second Exodus in the end time, and also a reconciliation for them back into the bride in time for the end time. So that's a future process and part of the resurrection process as well. So these are clearly angels, as the Old Testament sort of understanding is. And there's more passages. And sons of God, angels, the host of heaven, and stars are used interchangeably in the Old Testament, all for terms of angels.
Right.
And they're used together, so you get a common sort of understanding. And they produced the giants. And a lot of people might say the giants are just taller humans, right? And it was the Sethites who are the sons of God, and they created them. But these were spectacularly huge, and they're not just 7 feet tall. The antediluvian giants, the Nephilim, these were somewhere between 20 and 40 feet tall, maybe larger. But they're giants amongst the species, and you're creating a hybrid species here by the fallen angels. And the fallen angels have the ability to take a human form.
Yeah.
And they are by their creation spirit beings. But
Right.
we see, like in Hebrews 13, that they have the ability to take a bodily form, and we won't recognize them because in that passage, we're warned that you should be kind to all strangers, lest you come across an angel unaware. In the
Right.
Sodom and Gomorrah narrative, in the chapter just before, you have Jehovah the Elohim and two angels taking a bodily form, physically interacting in the world. And Abraham at first doesn't recognize them as the word of God and two angels. He recognizes them as men. But then he realizes after the story continues that they're angels. And then these two angels go to Sodom. But they know that they're angels coming as judges at that time. So they can make themselves known or not. But the point of the matter is we have both Old and New Testament testifying and many other examples. They can take a bodily form, and they can take a form of their choosing and size. And so when they take that form, they now create DNA. And when they reproduce, they're going to pass on some of that, including a counterfeiting of the spirit that is immortal with the Nephilim in Genesis 6:1-4, which is why God limits all life to 120 years. A lot of people think that's the commission time for Noah, but the Bible is not inaccurate and it doesn't make math mistakes. So if you look at the book ending of Noah's genealogy, it comes at the end of chapter 5, and then you get the Nephilim story, that's the preamble to the flood story and the context for the flood story. Then you get the reintroduction of Noah and his commission. And as you put all the passages together regarding Noah and the ages, it's 100 years from the time of the birth of his sons to the time he goes on the ark, and not 120 years. And all the language in Hebrew is dealing with the spirit. It's not dealing with Noah's commission. So that's, again, a rationalization of the story. And I get that from what we talked about. So you have this preternatural violation against the laws of creation. And what the angels are doing here is they are creating a spurious race that is larger, stronger, and more gifts that in terms of powers and capabilities than humans, and they're going to dominate the world. They're going to take over the governments and the kingships and the armies, and they're going to enslave humankind. And we're going to see this somehow show up again after the flood. And so the angels have created demigods, heroes of old, as we would understand that in Greek, the mighty ones of renown. And these are the offspring of the fallen ones, which is Hebrew Nephilim, and the source word for Nephilim. Nephal is the word used for when Satan falls in Isaiah 14. Put the I am male plural on it, and it's the fallen ones. So there are the fallen ones of the Shemaim, the heavenly ones. Shema is the Hebrew word for heavens, and I am is the plural, and also expressed as a kind as well when applied to the host of heaven that angels are represented by. That includes stars, planets, and things like that. So when we look at the creation of these giants, they're doing the fallen angels' bidding because they do not want the Adamites to be resurrected, to be like angels, and then to eventually judge the angels for the crimes against humanity and to be raised higher than angels. So they start in Eden with their first revenge, and this is their second revenge, to create a race to destroy humankind from the face of the earth. That's their goal. And because of their size and their capabilities and their ability to multiply in the antediluvian or before the flood world, they actually, in a lot of the polytheist accounts, become the most populous group that's there. And they control all the dynasties. They control all of the religions, and they impose a polytheist religion on the whole world.
Can I just add there that I think also part of that reason, of course, is that prophecy from Genesis 3, verse 15, of the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, that, of course, they're trying to stop the Messiah there as well.
Yeah, and for how that sort of relates, if we look into polytheism, we see serpentine gods of old, and there are other kinds as well, but the most common one is a serpentine or a dragon type god. So Chinese have dragon creator gods, Nagas in India. You have
Right.
Osiris and Isis depicted as serpents. You have Enki and Enlil depicted as serpents, Zeus and Kronos. You have the feathered serpents of Quetzalcoatl and all the Central and South American gods, essentially getting, a different name for the same god. And these are seraphim angels. These are typically placed at the top of the order, although I would argue archangels would be a little higher, but that's a different story. These are six-winged, serpent-faced angels. These are heavenly dragons. And so when you see fallen angels, who are the gods in the pantheon, depicted as serpents, these are seraphim.
Yeah.
And they created most of the giants, not all, but many of the giants.
Right.
And so the giants initially, the kings before the flood and after the flood, are going to be depicted as serpents as well.
Right.
After the flood, because of a fertility issue that's going to be unique amongst the post-Diluvian giants, are going to be forced to intermarry with humans and dilute those bloodlines. They're going to start to lose some of those features. But you can go to, let's say, King Akhenaten or Pharaoh Akhenaten of the Egyptian pantheon, and this is over 1,000 years after the flood. You can see those serpentine looks on that face.
Right.
It has this long protruding chin, these very high cheekbones, large eyes that wrapped around and would glow. They would light up a room. They were called the Shining Ones. And these huge elongated skulls. And you can get an elongated skull by binding a child, but you can't create more volume.
Yeah.
And these are giants, and they're sutureless. They are different. They're a hybrid species. And so when we look at these giants that ruled both before and after the flood, we need to understand that they're there to destroy humankind. And they're the ones who are the context for the flood. When we see the violence that's talked about, these were the perfect warriors. They were the warriors that were trying to destroy the world and set up a world government. The Greek tradition of the first race of giants before the flood were the ones involved in the great wars. This is a common trait that in polytheism, the giants are told in all cultures all around the world. They just have different names for the same groups of people. So when you get in Greek, you have the heroes and the titans. Titans can be of heaven and can be of the earth. And so Atlas, for example, is the offspring of Poseidon and Cleito, who creates the 10 Atlantean kings before the flood. And Cleito's a human female. It's exactly the same story. Zeus, through the female Alcmene, creates Hercules.
Yeah.
Same story. This is the same story of watchers all around the world that
just packaged differently.
Yeah, it's just packaged with a polytheist lens and a different cultural lens. So the word dragon in Greek would be drakont or drakonta or drakon. All are series of words that derive and interchange. And drakont and drakonta means watcher. So now when you get into Sumeria with the Anunnaki or the Gidji gods of heaven, the Gidji means watcher. And it derives from Sumerian. Iggy for an eye is in to watch, and G or key, because the G and the key are interchangeable, for earth, watchers of the earth. And so in all the cultures all around the world, you have the watchers, which are the fallen angels that are ruling from the council of the gods in Psalms 82. Again, a standard thing in all cultures all around the world, and including listed in the Bible. These are also going to have their demigods, their spurious offspring, which are 50% God, ruling in the physical, visible world as their divine representatives. These are the royales. These are the bloodlines of the dynastic kings, royale meaning kings of God. as you take that back, and it's etymology. We probably don't have time to go through all of that etymology, but it'll end up going back as a transliteration of AL back to EL, right? So as an angel or a god. And so it's important to understand we live in their language, we live in their culture, we still live in their control. But before the flood, they are creating all of this violence. And in book 1, I walk through another aspect of this that's going to affect it is the technology and the knowledge that the angels provide the descendants of Cain and the giants. And so there's the 7 sacred sciences that is being developed that's going to merge with this knowledge. But this is angelic technology with planet-capable destruction. So the flood is brought about because of the violence in part. And that the flood is an intercession to prevent that technology, which is planet capability through fire, destruction through fire. The flood is brought so that all the names in the book of life will have an opportunity to have a chance to leave their name in the book of life or have it blotted out. There's a set period. There's an ordained period that's in play that only God knows. And so it's important to sort of understand that context. And then the whole earth was corrupted, and all the flesh was corrupted. That's the Hebrew word shakath, which means to pervert, to ruin, to destroy, to change, to manipulate. And this suggests that all the flesh was perverted. So not just the introduction of the genes of the gods into the demigods and then into humans, but also perhaps other DNA manipulation through this technology, and also the plant genome. And so when it says the end time is going to be like the days of Noah, we're just catching up to that technology because nothing is new under the sun, according to Ecclesiastics. What was will be again. And the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow.
Right. And we see hints of those right. And we see hints of those magical powers and mysticism that people had even up to the time of Moses, where the Pharaoh, where he brought his best sorcerers to make the snakes as well. And people think today, well, what? They were magic in the Bible? Yes.
Yes. That stems out of the merging of the knowledge of developed by the Cainite line of the 7 sacred sciences that we know as the 7 liberal arts with the angelic technology.
Yeah.
It's a knowledge cult polytheism, and it's connected to the pantheon. And so all of this we're just catching up to today.
Yeah.
And I think our knowledge is being enhanced to speed up that process, because I do think we're in the fig tree generation. So in Genesis 6:4, it talks about the fallen angels, the sons of God, the Nephilim of the Shemaim. They go to human females and they create giants, Nephilim, and they do so again, as in like manner, in the same way. So they're going to create more kinds of giants. Now, we also get chimera giants that's talked about in Greek mythology, in Sumerian mythology, and elsewhere, like King Hababa of the Cedar Forest, or the actual word chimera that's used in Greek mythology for the creatures. This is multiple kinds of animals with a living sentient spirit in it. So it's a mixture of interaction of the fallen angels and a technology of DNA manipulation. So just so that we understand the context why the flood is going to be brought again. And the flood is brought because destruction by fire, as 2 Peter talks about, is reserved for the end time.
Right.
And so it's an intercession. And so we don't know whether or not doing it in like manner again in Genesis 6:4 means more incursions before the flood or includes after the flood. What we do know is giants mysteriously show up after the flood in the Bible in many more names and locations and passages than what people think. And it is a common constant in all the polytheist cultures around the world. So again, you get this consistency from a polytheist testimony and from a monotheist testimony.
Right. Yeah.
So there's only 3 ways giants can show up after the flood.
Hey guys, I really hope you're enjoying the video so far, but I have some big and exciting news to share. I'm writing a novel with my brother set in the world before the flood. It's going to feel like a mix of fantasy and historical fiction. Much like Lord of the Rings, Warcraft, or Narnia. But here's the best part. It is based on biblical and archaeological truths. In this book, we're diving deep into the ancient world of fallen angels, the Nephilim, and the family lines of Adam, specifically Seth and Cain. You'll get to experience how they lived in cities like Nippur and Eridu, how they fell into darkness, and how they became so evil in a world filled with beasts and dragons like the Behemoth and Leviathan, described in the book of Job. If you've ever wondered what the world was like before the flood, in the antediluvian world, then this novel is going to bring it to life in a way you've never seen before. It's packed with action, spiritual battles, and deep insights into humanity's early struggles. It answers the biggest questions of humanity. Why are we here? What is the meaning of life? And where are we going when we die? And here's the exciting part. I'm giving you, all my amazing subscribers, exclusive access to the first 4 chapters of the novel for free. Just click the link in the video description, enter your name, email, and we'll send it to you. Now, if you're watching this video much later, this book might already be out. And then you can just grab it at any of our websites at DLM Christian Lifestyle or Ruach Entertainment. Now, this book is perfect for unbelievers and even for those on the fence when it comes to their faith, because it's a gripping story that pulls you in, and before you know it, you will see how it aligns with the truth in God's Word, the Bible. Now, thank you for sticking with me. Let's get back to the message of today.
There's only 3 ways giants can show up after the flood. One is somehow they survive the flood. It's not my favorite position. It's my second position on it. There's another one that I'll get to in a couple of minutes. So that's with angelic help, is that sort of category. And that includes on an ark. And when I say on another ark, when we look at the Epic of Gilgamesh with the flood story in it, these are all giants on that ark. They are 2/3 God, 1/3 human, just as Gilgamesh and Enkidu are 2/3 God and 1/3 human versus 50-50, which is generally the other sort of description. So they're either allegorically saying they're more divine than human, or there's something else going on here, and they're subdividing with some sort of gene play that makes them maybe bigger and more powerful than the other types of giants. And so you also get Deucalion and Pyrrha in the Greek understanding of the flood, which people say is the Greek Noah. And it's like, no, Deucalion is the son of Prometheus, who is a god. This is another Nephilim. So it's a giant story, and you get giants being saved on arks all around the world. There's also discussions that angels would have helped them get to the top of a mountain, but I don't really think that one's viable because the flood would have covered all of the mountaintops from the biblical descriptions.
Right.
In the earth, off the earth, in another dimension, however they helped them, and God knew that they would do this, and he's letting things play out through their free choice. There is an ordained time when that comes to a close, but they're indicting themselves every time they do these things. And so the second way, which is my third possibility, is somehow on Noah's Ark. And that might include the wives having giant DNA. And you could also look at, I don't really like that one, but it's a possibility because we don't have that smoking gun verse after the flood. We only know that they show up. The reason why I don't like that one as much, but I leave a crack open for the possibility, is that you have to account for the 4 races that show up after the flood. There's 4 wives that are unnamed biblically, and I think the races are represented in that. And Noah was pure of flesh and pure of spirit. And one would expect with the genealogical tracking that they're going to be genealogically pure as well and a follower of God and are there to restart. So the story from a consistent basis suggests that not in the genes, because I don't think you can, with the understanding we have DNA today, you can't have a hybrid species and the different races all intermix and have them show up in the perfect sort of way that they show up after the flood. It just makes sort of no sense. So either humans survived the flood from those other races, which biblically other cultures talk about, but from a biblical perspective, that's kind of taken off the table. So the other way on the ark is what the Gnostics and some of the polytheists talk about is a stowaway, like Tubal-Cain or King Og is a stowaway on the ark. Some say that Ham was a giant. Some say all the sons were giants. Some say all of Noah and his family were giants from a polytheist perspective. So that's the third option. And for people who think that that would go against Scripture, you can make a legal argument for it. In the details in Genesis, where God says he's going to destroy everything on the land that he created. He didn't create the giants. The fallen angels did. So you have a small legal twist there, but my preference and how it fits better into the New Testament details and into the Old Testament details is a second incursion after the flood. So a different set of angels, because all the angels who violated all the laws of creation went to the pit prison as punishment after watching their offspring die. And also for people who are out there saying that the God of the Bible is evil because he either brought or permitted the flood, I would remind polytheists in the accounting in polytheism and all the accounts around the world, it's the pantheon of gods who bring the flood. And they bring the flood because of the spurious ones who become so corrupt and violent, and that the humans are too noisy and too numerous. So that's the reason to wipe them out. And so I think what's happening is God is permitting them to do that, maybe even forcing them as part of the punishment to kill their offspring and followers, that they've totally corrupted the earth and the flesh. So second incursion is my way, and that would suggest that a different set of fallen angels would create another race of giants. So in polytheism, we have parent gods and offspring gods. Parent gods rule before the flood. Offspring gods rule after the flood. So a classic example would be Kronos and Gaia are parent gods in the Greek mythology. Zeus is the male god, chief of the gods after. He's the son of Kronos. He's an offspring god in their way of reckoning. In the Bible, you have Baal, who is an offspring god ruling after the flood with his Baalim council from Mount Hermon. And his father is El. And El's consort was Anat. Baal's consort after the flood, even though he's listed for a short time before the flood with Ashtaroth as well. But it's Anat after the flood, Baal and Anat. And so in the Sumerian pantheon, you would have Anu as the chief god before the flood. Then you have Enki and Enlil, which are the two major proponents, and they're the offspring of Anu. So it's the same story again all around the flood. And they all create giants, both before and after the flood. So in the Ugaritic texts, Baal and Anat and the other Baalim council of gods like Amur and Keret and others, they will create giants, and they're called the Rephaim, which do show up as the name for giants after the flood.
Right.
So when you see giant after the flood, it's 25 times it's used for Rapha and Rephaim.
In the Bible.
Not Nephilim. Nephilim only shows up 3 times. One in Genesis 6:4 before the flood, then twice in Numbers 13:33, where it says the Anakim giants, the Anak, are the children, Ben, of giants, Nephilim. Now, this is in the evil part and the embellished part of the report of the scouts that go into Canaan, that bring back the report. And there's 3 kings of the Anak there, plus other people who are taller. But the Anak kings, Sheshai, Talmai, and Ahiman, that's accurate. These are giants. They're just not Nephilim.
Right.
And so they're trying to terrify the Israelites not to go in, because they've seen who they're going to be up against, giants and hybrid giants, and they're saying, we don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah.
And so they actually convinced the giants, but that's an embellishment, and that's why it's called part of that evil report, and it's going against God's will. So I mean, it hits on a number of different levels.
I just want to add, for people who don't know that story, it's a little bit funny for me when I read it, because I can imagine myself in that time, these people coming back and giving this bad report and say, well, we looked like grasshoppers to these people.
Yeah, an exaggeration, but the point is made. They are significantly larger. And so, King Og's bed, who's a Rephaim, and the last of the Rephaim, his bed is 9 cubits by 4 cubits, and it's made of iron because it won't show his weight. And they're going to leave this bed on display for generations in Rabbah, so the Israelites never forget who they had to conquer in the time of the Exodus. King Og is a king, so he's, as Josephus has measured the Nephilim and the Rephaim on the royal cubit. That's 21 inches versus 18 inches for the common. That's going to make that bed about 16 feet long and 7 feet wide. Yeah. And so that's that height to width ratio that I mentioned earlier, 2 to 1, because they're very stout, as the Old Testament calls them. And that means muscular and strong, not fat. And these were the perfect warriors. So that's going to make Og somewhere between 12 to 15 feet tall and 4, 5, or 6 feet wide. Now, Gilgamesh is even larger as a post-Diluvian giant, 6th generation after the flood, versus the Gilgamesh in the Book of Giants before the flood. He is listed in the Ugaritic text. He's also listed in the Chaldean and the Sumerian version as 11 cubits tall and 4 cubits wide. So he's king of Uruk, and he is 19 feet tall and 7 feet wide. These are monsters. Let there be no mistake about it. The average post-Diluvian giant in Greek was 12 to 14 feet tall as well. So again, there's a constant in the sizing here. And Goliath is, again, this is 400 years after the Exodus, over 1,000 years, about 1,500 years after the biblical dating of the flood. He is 6 cubits and a span.
Yeah.
That is, on a royal cubit, as king of Gath, and Ashish is the one who replaces him after Goliath is killed. That's going to make him 11 feet 3 inches, and he's also described as stout. So this is a significant size. And there's one other dimension of a giant that's provided in the time of King David, and there's an Egyptian who is 5 cubits tall. So that's going to make him, somewhere at 8 to 9 feet tall, but still a giant nonetheless, just not as big as Goliath is, right? So probably about 9 feet tall, doing the math. So we need to understand that these are physical giants. Now, we know the Anakim are not Nephilim, because in Deuteronomy 2, Moses describes these giants in a unique way, and he lists a number of giant tribes, like the Horim, like the Emim, like the Zamzuzim, like the Avim, like the Kajulhim. Notice the I am plural here. I am is that male plural again, and in the ancient culture was a majestic suffix for a dynastic bloodline. Very important to keep in mind. And it says that the Anakim are giants, Hebrew Rapha for giant.
Right.
And King Og is the last of the Rephaim. And the Rephaim are our tribe as well, just as they show up in Genesis 14 and Genesis 15 as a tribe of giants in the War of Giants, with the four Mesopotamian giant kings warring with the giants of the covenant land. And then amongst the mighty seven in Genesis 15, in the land that Abraham is being promised, from the Nile to the Euphrates, from Mount Hermon to the Sea of Aqaba and the Indian Ocean to the south. So this is a wide area, and it's also got many of the hybrid giants that would have intermarried with the Rephaim to create a smaller size of giant. I won't get into too much detail on them right now. And then you have the triple K, which is the mighty 10, which would be the Cadmonim, the Kenim, and the Kenazim, which don't have patriarchs and table of nations and are also giants. So we get giant tribes that are starting to show up and don't have an affiliation back to the patriarchs in the table of nations in Genesis 10 and First Chronicles that list the 70 nations that's going to be ruled over by these council of the gods after the flood, the offspring gods like Baal who create the Rephaim. And so I think second incursion is likely fits the Bible best. And when you look, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say, for those of you who do not know, I made a video on this as well that I'll add at the end of this video, but I don't want to get into it myself. I want you guys to listen and understand, get to know Gary a little bit more. But I actually agree with you on this. I think that's highly possible.
And so I think Sodom is likely the best location for that second incursion of giants. It's a Canaanite Rephaim city and a Pentapolis, and typically in the covenant land, they did their military defenses through city-state fortresses in groups of 5. So you have 5 cities of the plain that is working as one group of Canaanites and with Rephaim kings. And King Og, for example, is the most powerful one, and he's going to have 60 cities. 60 city-states. So he's got 12 Pentapolis groups under him. And King Sihon is not as powerful, and he doesn't have all of his cities grouped in the same way in terms of establishing how many he had. I think I counted 34. So he's either going to have 7 or 8 groups of Pentapolis city-states under him. So understand when we see the Philistines, that's a Pentapolis as well. It's a constant. And I walk through that whole concept. But I just wanted people to understand that Sodom is also in the War of Giants and the cause of the War of Giants. And the Mesopotamian kings are going to take out all the giant empires protecting the hybrid vassal state of Canaan. And are part of their alliance. So they have to take the giants out first. That's why they go to Mount Hermon, and then they go to the south, and then finally they hit the 5 cities of the plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, and the 3 other ones, at the end of that campaign. When Abraham has to go free Lot, right? So it's important to understand how miraculous Abraham taking on this giant army was able to do with his commandos to free Lot. So when we look at Sodom and Gomorrah, this is, as we mentioned earlier, where the 2 angels go. And typically we have this discussion of this is the home of and the location of where sodomy is going to get its name from. And that's what we hang the whole sort of mythos on. But the Bible and the Quran talk about greater details of polytheism, rebellion, corruption. And then when we overlay into the idea that if this was the place where giants were created, they would know how they were created through human females, that Canaan is likely the one supplying the daughters to create these Rephaim giants after the flood. And he's doing that because of the curse of Ham that passes only on to him as part of the Hamite progeny. And so he doesn't want to become in bondage. He's going to intermarry him and his sons with the Rephaim after they're created, originally from one of, probably early on from Canaanite's daughter, or a number of his daughters, to create the original Rephaim, and then further intermarriage to create the hybrid giant humans like the Amorites, who don't have a patriarch, for example, or the Jebusites, or the all of the 9 that are patriarchless. There's only 9 patriarchless tribes in the Table of Nations. That's because every Rephaim patriarch.
And just for those of you who do not understand who Ham is the son of Noah. So just to fit it in.
Yeah. So they understand through the Rephaim giants and the Rephaim religion that they've adopted how the giants were created. So now you have 2 angels going to the city, and are they saying, we want you to have sex with us, as in same sex, or do we want you to change your sex to a female because they know they have changeling capability to create giants, or do they want them to have sex with their daughters to create more giants, because the Rephaim have this fertility issue after the flood, and they're going to have to intermarry, which they've already started to do within Sodom. So now we move forward to the New Testament, and we get in Jude 1 and in 2 Peter 2, you have the story of this filthy conversation and having strange sex in Sodom. And both of those passages are linked to the same crimes that happened before the flood. So this is language that is speaking to greater sins, because it's the complete polytheist culture at its zenith and uninhibited. And I think that's part of the whole story. And so when we see the days of Noah lived 600 years before the flood and 350 years after the flood, and Sodom fits in. In the days of Noah, in the Luke version, not only does he use the days of Noah, it's going to be like that, but also the days of Lot. Now, that's destruction by fire. So it's linking fire to the destruction of Sodom to the end time destruction that's talked about in 2 Peter 3, that's reserved for the end time, versus the flood, but it also mentions the flood and the crimes are the same. So in book 2, I walked through all of this in chapter to link all of those ones, because after doing book 1, I realized people needed to see more of the biblical passages to make this work. And the Gnostics account is that when they look at, and this isn't in the Bible, in the book of Enoch, where it has the Herem Anathema, the oath the 200 angels took on Mount Hermon to create the giants, it doesn't say in the book of Enoch that the giants were created in Mount Hermon. That's just where the oath was taken. So the Gnostics' understanding of that is that the giants begat at Gomorrah after the flood, or before the flood, with the Nephilim, and then were replanted in Sodom after the flood. So now you have another polytheist version that is also pointing at Sodom for a possible location for that second incursion. So do we have a smoking gun verse? But if they were created again after the flood, it was done in that like manner as Genesis 6:4 was talking about, and is likely referring to that as well. But we don't have that smoking gun verse. We only have all of these different types of tribes that show up after the flood. And they're not just in the covenant land. They're in all places where the people of Babel are going to migrate to and intermarry with. The giants are described in their original meanings, whether it is in Sumeria with Elam, which is Olam, which means the ancient ones, and there's Shemites are going to intermarry with the Olamim, the ancient ones, as the Aboriginals, and take on their name. And you also have all the ones in the covenant land that are defined as aboriginals of the land that the Canaanites migrated to intermarry with, and it's the same story where all the descendants went. And so now things start to make a lot of sense. And they begin to populate, I think, fairly aggressively shortly after the flood. But then that inability to produce women, I think, is the big issue. That they're not able to produce enough women, which is why they're going to have to intermarry with humans or go extinct.
Yeah. I've always thought it was also interesting that the Bible mentions that those two angels, the good angels that went there, Sodom and Gomorrah, that the people wanted to sleep with them as well.
Yeah, it's good angels, and they're trying to corrupt them. And so why would they have that motivation to do that other than they want to have more giants born? Well, they also know that the more the fallen angels were in a physical form, and they walked amongst humans before the flood and shortly after, until the offspring gods who violated the crimes were removed and sent to the pit prison as well. So they walked amongst us, but when they're in that physical body, the world is corrupted by them, and those physical bodies become subject to the physical corruption. And so they know if you entice loyal ones, they may rebel and submit to the corruption of the physical flesh that in their oiketerion that they've created. That means dwelling place for a spirit, or habitation, or house in heaven, as it shows up in Jude 1:6 and in 2 Corinthians 5:2, only used twice in the New Testament. And so I think it's that influence that they're playing on as well, is, maybe, and we can have new gods who can create new demigods and rule over us. It may be a power play as well. But if we understand that they know the culture and the religion of the giants, then it starts to explain the motivations.
Right. Yeah. I wanted just to share something very interesting. When I grew up, my father, he was a preacher. He lived the way he preached. And there was this satanic group in this area. And there was this one woman that came to him that wanted to accept Christ, but she was called the wife of the devil. And he helped her through it, and she had millions of demons. But she explained these rituals that people did. And these demons would go into people, and they would have these sexual rituals as well. So it's interesting when you start to understand these things, and how even that it was Jesus that bounded these Genesis 6 fallen angels up into the pit. And I think that's part of the reason when we read that part after the Old Testament, in the New Testament, that Jesus came to the man with legion, those demons, why they said, Son of God, don't put us into the pit, because they knew Jesus did it.
Yeah, what's interesting as well is in 1 Peter 3, and it's also using language of the crimes of Sodom and before the flood. There's a passage in 1 Peter 3 that's talking about Jesus, while he was still in the grave, went into Tartarus, or hell, or Hades, Sheol, where the pit prison is located, and talked to the spirits there.
Yeah.
Well, he's talking to those ones in the pit prison. He's
Exactly.
talking to the fallen angels in there, and he's talking to the worst of the disembodied spirits, who were originally giants, who were called the terrible ones in Ezekiel 32, and locked in the sides of the pit prison, along with the mighty El that's in the middle of the prison. But he's talking to the fallen angels. This is my speculation, what he's saying, because it doesn't say that. My speculation is that you didn't anticipate or know about the resurrection. And in 1 Corinthians, it talks about the princes or the archons that rule this world didn't know about the resurrection. Otherwise, they wouldn't have ensured Jesus was crucified.
Right.
Because it's the resurrection that's the end of the rebellion, and he's there to talk to the worst of the fallen angels, the ones who did the worst crimes that are in the pit prison, to say, when I resurrect on the Sunday, your rebellion is officially over, and you are reserved for the lake of fire that Matthew 25 talks about.
Right.
And so again, otherwise, like, who is he talking to, and why is he there?
Right.
The churches do not try and explain what scenario brings those spirits there, and why, while he's in the grave, why he would go there. Because Adamites were created as a resolution to the angelic rebellion. And with the resurrection, we get the gift of the resurrection, where we'll be able to be in the future time adopted as sons of God and to be raised up like angels as the inheritors of eternity.
Yeah, we'll receive those eternal bodies. And you know, when I studied theology, they didn't teach any of these to me as well. And when I read Psalm 82 the first time, and these things, I was like, what? I need to take more time to really understand this. But these fallen angels that he went and he basically told them, I'm victorious. We read this prophecy in the book of Revelation as well, in the time of tribulation, that, you know, Apollyon, that will have the key of the bottomless pit and will release all of these fallen angels that were bound, and then they will go on humanity. So it's all connected. It's just fascinating.
It is. And so it's not like we're making this up about this pit prison. It's talked about all the way through the Bible, and in the Quran, and the judgment. I mean, all of this is important information. And so if we understand that now these giants survived the flood, we can start to understand the Babel story a little bit better. And if we understand that they had technology that we're just catching up to today before the flood, we might understand what's going on at Babel, because initially after the flood, God instructs everybody, the people of Noah, as they start to multiply, to leave the mountain and migrate around the whole world. Right? That's the instructions. They do not.
No.
And I think they're fearful. And in the Septuagint, in their interpretation of Genesis 10 and the translations, they say Nimrod earned his reputation as a mighty one, or a Gibborim, which is the same term used to describe the giants in Genesis 6:4, and he became a mighty one, Chalal, through rituals, through breaking of bonds, sexual rituals. There's something going on here, and that's the same word in Genesis 6:1, where you have the children of men who are starting to multiply, or began to multiply. That word began there is also halal or chalal, depending on how you want to pronounce that, of the same meaning. And they're the ones that are going to intermarry with the fallen angels. And now you have a transition somehow of a son of Cush that's going to be giant-like, not called a Rephaim, not called a Nephilim, but called the word that would describe a giant, Gibborim, or Gibbor in the singular.
Just if we're going a little bit fast for people, remember, so it's Noah, he had 3 sons. This one is Ham, and then it's Cush, and then it's Nimrod that we're talking about now. In the Sumerian language, he is called Enmerkar.
Enmerkar, exactly, yes. And which is, has Nimrod basically within the name and a few other meanings in there. It's a title. And so, and Enmerkar has an accounting that's identical, except seen through a polytheist lens, at Eridu, of the Babel story. And it's 3rd generation. He is just as Nimrod is 3rd generation. And I cover the connections off of that in book 1 for people if they want to follow that through. And the Babel story is known all around the world too, in all cultures. Not all cultures, but many cultures around the world. And I give lots of examples of that in book 1. So who are they afraid of? Because they're not moving in with the instructions that God gave them, and he just saved them to do this. I mean, this is crazy. And I think it's because they didn't want to be wiped from the face of the earth. I think they saw the giants, knew the giants were roaming around, and they gathered together as one people to build a city and a tower. But where did that knowledge come from? Because Noah wouldn't have provided it to them. He wouldn't want, as the patriarch, want to transfer that knowledge that helped corrupt the ancient world to build a city and a tower. And a city at that time had walls. That's why you built cities. It's the Hebrew word Ayir, or ear, IYR. And it's the same word for watcher that's used in Daniel 4 times, which is a seraphim angel. And a watcher is another name, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, but from a watchtower, as we make that sort of connection to watch, to guard, to protect yourself, right? And watchers
Right.
are awake all the time around the throne of God with the four groups of watchers, the Ophanim, the cherubim, the seraphim, and the archangels. And so they're there as watcher angels. And I don't think they have to protect God anyway, because he's omnipotent. He can do anything, but they're there for different functions. Some people say they're guardian angels. They're not there. They're like the cherubim are covering the throne. The seraphim are the ministers before the altar. There's functions that they're performing there.
Right.
And so, but it's the same word. And if we look at some of the ancient cities in polytheism, it's the gods or the watchers who built the great old cities before the Adamites come along.
Hmm.
And so there's a relationship between city and watchers and fallen angels. And we have this knowledge and this fear that's not explained. But what we are told that acting as one people with one language, there is nothing that they choose to do now that they will be incapable of doing.
Right.
So in the secret societies that I cover off in detail in book 1 and the Gnostic religion, which is basically their Western polytheist religion, they have something called a polychronicon where they have their side of the Babel story. And the secret societies take their creation back to the time of Enoch, son of Cain. There's 2 Enochs, keep that in mind. Lamech, there's
Right.
two Lamechs, keep that. One's a Cain line, one's a Sethian line. And so of the Cain line, Enoch, Lamech, Nama, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain are their greatest patriarchs. Because out of these 7 sciences and the development of the mystery sun cult and bull cult used to house this knowledge comes the mystery schools taught to the top 2 classes both before and after the flood, the royals, the greater royal family. And those are the mystery schools. Come the secret societies, just as we see initiatory organizations on all the campuses even to this day. And the most notorious one, I guess, if you want to look at it by that, Skull and Bones for the Ivy League, which is an Illuminati order for the pseudo blue bloods of North America. Expanded story, but just understand nothing is new under the sun. It's the same thing happening over and over and over. And so when we look at their accounting, Enoch and or Lamech, there's 2 accounts in it. Enoch creates all of this antediluvian knowledge. He's the great patriarch of the knowledge and the mystical religion, Enoch, son of Cain. Yeah. And that he writes 36,525 books and puts them in 9 vaults stacked on top of each other beneath the Great Pyramid, which is also built from his knowledge. That also has the angelic knowledge at that point, because they know the flood is coming and the civilization is going to be wiped out. But they're not sure it's the flood. There might be a destruction by fire because you got these giants roaming around. So they have 2 pillars. One is designed to survive fire. One is designed to float. And so it's the one that floats by implication is the one that a fellow named Harmine, as he's called in the Polychronicon, finds this pillar, and we would know as Hermes. And in the greater mythos, Hermes Trismegistus, he finds the pillar and the directions to find the knowledge to the religion and to the ancient knowledge under the Great Pyramid, and he takes it back to Nimrod, who uses this knowledge to introduce the Babel religion, which is the Enochian mysticism from before the flood. And Babel is the root word for Babylon, as it's used in the New Testament for the Babylon religion of the end time. And he initiates 1,000 Masons to build Babel City and Babel Tower. And he becomes an Antichrist archetype type figure because all the Noahites, Adamites, are in one place, and you have an Antichrist type figure who is beginning to be Gibberim over, ruling them, and they're rebelling against God. And the Gnostics and the secret societies say that he's that Nimrod is the first grand master of ancient masonry after the flood, and he writes the first post-Diluvian constitution for the Masons. So he's one of the highest patriarchs in the secret societies. And so now we have the story of Babel that starts to make a little bit more sense. And there's an interesting thing as we learn about this technology, and who knows whether it's true, but in the book of Yasher, for example, to use a semi-biblical account, and it's got a lot of issues and a lot of mysticism in it, and in polytheist accounts, but I'm using the Yasher account here, is that Nimrod was very hubris, like an Antichrist figure, and he was telling God that if you ever got out of line again, I'm going to go into heaven and I'm going to slay you. I'm going to shoot arrows and use my swords and I'm going to kill you. I mean, that is Antichrist type language,
right,
that Antichrist will use and actually do in Daniel 8:10. He'll actually go into heaven at the midpoint of the last 7 years and throw some of the starry host down and trample on them. So this is one of those repeating things, but getting to heaven is only an Antichrist, as in the Antichrist thing. So he doesn't do it because God intercedes.
right.
Because all the names that are written in the book of life from before creation will have that opportunity to leave their name in or have it blotted out. It's just the way things are going to play out. And so in the Akkadian version of Babel, they don't understand Babel as meaning confusion of languages. They would spell it as Babalu. And in this case, Bab means a gateway or a portal, and ILU is the transliteration of EL, just as AL is. And so Babalu means, and the U is kind of like a Hebrew feminine suffix. So if you have Elohim or Elohim is the male plural, Eloah is the Hebrew plural with the feminine suffix, and it could mean a goddess, or it could mean the application of the might of God, right? And so Allah would be understood from a Hebrew context, would be an AL transliteration, as in Baal, meaning Lord God. But it would be a female application to it, not meaning a female goddess, but the application of the power of God. It's sort of in action, right? And so not the polytheist God name Allah, or out of the Middle East that a lot of people say. It's and literally in the Quran, I mean, they're saying they're worshiping the God of the Bible, whether or not Christians want to agree with that or not. I'm just saying what it says. So, and just sort of connecting the languages. And so, and we need to understand that. And Eloah is actually used in the Old Testament. So in Daniel 11, we have the God of fortresses. That's Eloah Mouths.
Yeah.
And so there's the application of the might into the forces. So is that a female goddess? You could translate it that way, or it could be the power and the might of God being exercised into the God of forces that Antichrist worships in secret.
Wow, this is important because I've heard some people in Islam saying that, hey, Allah is in the Bible, and so this is the real God. Of course, for me, I believe it's 100% not the God as we know him. In the Bible is different.
And there's a few iterations, particularly when you get the crossover Aramaic out of Daniel. That's kind of a link from Hebrew into Arabic, and they're very similar languages in sort of the initial sort of spellings and stuff. So not how they write it, but from the actual conversion into letters that we would understand. So when you have this understanding from the Akkadian version that Babel is meaning gateway of the gods, that could be understood as a portal of the gods as well. So if he had the technology of the antediluvian epoch, which is interdimensional technology, he could have done two things. One, he could have gone into Sheol, Hades, to free the gods that were imprisoned, that he's worshiping in his pantheon of gods, and or into heaven to make war in heaven. He may have actually been building something that he was not just being very hyperbolic in his language. They were building something that God was saying, no, you're not going to do that. And it doesn't make any sense that you can build a tower into heaven.
Yeah,
I
yeah. I've
mean,
always thought,
physically, that's
yeah,
not possible. But if it's
right.
technology, and that pyramids, ziggurats, towers are the same type of building in the ancient world, both before and after the flood, and thought of as a technology housed within it, now things start to make sense, especially when we're looking at quantum computing, which is
Right.
interdimensional using AI. And we're using, places like CERN to test that type of technology. It starts to make sense if you understand that, the days of Noah is what the end time is going to be like, both before and after the flood.
Yeah, I mean, if you start to look at all of this, it's fascinating how they build those ziggurats in line with the stars, and how they read it, how they understood it with all this knowledge, and perverting it, astronomy into astrology, and you can go into this so deep.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think this is a lot for people to take in. So I would suggest to you guys, if you can, get this book of Gary Wayne. He explains it in detail. You have time to read through it, read it again, certain parts of it, so that it makes sense. But the Bible is very clear. Before the flood, the Nephilim, they were there. After the flood, they were there. We have all these tribes of them. And now it makes sense that you can follow this prophecy from Genesis 3, verse 15, of the seed of the woman that is the Messiah, that will end the works of the devil, but also the seed then of the serpent. And you can see these two from Adam, Seth, Noah to Abraham, the nation of Israel. Why Israel had to attack these other nations, why there was this constant war. It's always this battle between light and dark, and we actually finally see it ending in the book of Revelation. But Gary, I want to give it to you. Is there anything that you want to say more about these tribes?
Yeah, so with the different tribes of Nephilim, and I'm going to cap off your serpent seed as well here, and we'll do it fairly quickly.
Okay.
With the tribes, understand that none of the giant tribes are in the Table of Nations. So the classic example that we can use to point to that is Arba, who in the book of Joshua is the patriarch for the Anakim. But Arba is not in the Table of Nations. You have this tribe of Rephaim that's a distinct tribe, even though the other ones can be called Rephaim. There's an initial first tribe, probably firstborn.
Hey guys, I trust that you are enjoying today's message so far, but I want to share with you something that you might not know, something big. We started a gaming company called Ruach Entertainment to bring truth into entertainment. Now you know how dark the entertainment industry has become, and we want to shine our light in it. Why? To save souls for Christ. So we want to overcome evil with good. But to do that, we need your help. So after the message of today, please take a look at our website, Ruach Entertainment, and our new YouTube channel. And then just support us by subscribing and watching our videos and sharing them with your family and friends. This is huge because the gaming industry is bigger than the filming and music industry combined. And remember, Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, verse 21, to those outside the law, I became as one outside the law, that I might win those outside the law. This is what we're planning to do with Ruach Entertainment. Instead of trying to bring people to the Bible, we're just going to take the Bible to them. Games are just a form of storytelling, but instead of reading it or watching it, you engage with it. So imagine how we can share the gospel to over 3 billion gamers in the world. Some who would never even step a foot inside a church. Now we are willing, my team and I, but we cannot do it without your support. So please support us today.
you have this tribe of Rephaim that's a distinct tribe, even though the other ones can be called Rephaim. There's an initial first tribe, probably firstborn, to start an eponymously named tribe. They're listed in Genesis 14 and Genesis 15 as the Rephaim tribe, right? So there's a specific tribe. Rapha is not listed in the Table of Nations. Now, in Genesis 36, which is an add-on to help make sense of the Old Testament, it provides the Horim with the dukes of Edom, and the patriarch there is Seir, who Mount Seir is named after. Actually goes back to Satyr or Satyr in Hebrew, as in a hairy goat god. But he's a Horim giant, and he has a daughter named Timnah, so a pure blood giant who's going to marry Eliphaz to start the Amalekite tribe. These are different people than the Amalekim that are shown in Genesis 14. There's a few generations in between here, and probably a couple of hundred years. And these are a hybrid giant because Eliphaz is the son of Esau. Esau is the brother of Jacob, who his name's changed to Israel, who Jacob steals the Messianic promise, steals the birthright, steals the blessing from Esau. And Esau also marries a Horim giant named Aholibama, and other people as well. But those are two hybrid giants that are like 7 to 9 feet tall. They're called the Shazu in the Egyptian execration text. That's like the Amorites. That's like the Jebusites. That's the Amalekites. So I don't have time to walk all through that aspect today, but understand that the Amalekites don't have Amalek in the Table of Nations, but Amalek shows up with the hybrids. But the patriarch for the Amalekites doesn't show, for the Amalekim in Genesis 14 don't show up. And you have the same issue with the triple K in Genesis 15, the Cadmonim, the Kenazim, and the Kenim. Even though you can get patriarchal names later, these tribes predate those, whether or not it's from Israel or from, the descendants of Esau. It's out of order. So the Bible is either in contradiction or you've got giants and hybrids. So understand that what is going on in Genesis 36, you have to have this information to understand some of the peoples and why the Amalekites, along with the Amalekim, because they're going to move to Petra where the Amalekim live, they're the ones waiting for Israel when they come out of Egypt to wipe them from the face of the earth, to be no more. Why? Because in Old Testament law, they would inherit the Messianic promise, the blessings, and the birthright.
Sure.
And then you would have a hybrid dragon bloodline with all of those blessings. And that's why they're there to do it. Now, when you talked about the serpent's seed, in Isaiah 14, there's something called the serpent's root, and I cover this in book 2. And Isaiah 14 is an interesting, what I call a dual prophecy, because it has interesting, valuable prehistory information. You need to understand what's going on in the Bible. You have events for figures in the time of the prophet or sometime shortly thereafter. And then you have some unfulfilled events that will happen in the end time. So in Isaiah 14, that's where you have Satan, who tries to raise his throne into heaven, just like Antichrist will want to do, because they do everything in the same way that their gods tried to do. And as you get into about verse 25, 14:25, you're getting into passages about the Assyrian, which is an allegory used in the Old Testament for the Antichrist several times. And then you get the serpent's root. And the language goes back to seraphim, which are the serpent-faced angels. Understand Satan in one of his aspects is seraphim-like, just as he's described as a dragon and a serpent in Revelation 12. He has other aspects like cherubim, like as he's a cherubim in Ezekiel 28 when he is in Eden, for example. And he has other titles. And when it says in the KJV, Lucifer, son of the morning. That's poorly translated, in my opinion. And it's the Hebrew is Halel ben Shakar, Halel, son of the morning. And he's part of his traits is the morning star order as well. And so Hail El, El as in Michael, as in Gabriel, those are angelic names, right?
Like the L.
Yeah, probably should have been translated as Michael is, because it has an El, or Gabriel, right? Or a Raphael, or a Uriel, or all other names that would show up in the Apocrypha or in the Book of Enoch. So this is important information because it's relating to the end time as well. And so, but there's a serpent's root. That's it's connected by its imagery to the curse prophecy of the serpent seed, just as Ham is a curse prophecy. And it gets fulfilled. Now, when we look at Psalms 21, 8 through 10, because one of the things I realized in book one is how little a lot of Christians know about the Bible. In fact, polytheists, particularly in the secret societies, know more than Christians, and they use that advantage to seed and wedge faith issues. And they know the vulnerabilities. There's a passage in Psalms 21, 8 through 11. And this talks about a seed line that connects to that other seed line that you laid the premise for. And I'm going to read it because it's so important.
Yeah.
So 21, 8, it says, then thine hand shall find out all thine enemies. Thy right hand shall find out those that hate thee. And of course, right hand, that's where Jesus sits, right? Yeah. Psalms 21, 9, thou shalt make them as a fiery oven in the time of thine anger. The Lord shall swallow them up in his wrath, and the fire shall devour. Lord is Jehovah there in the Hebrew, Jehovah of the Elohim, the word of God. Okay, just as Jesus comes back for the end time. Wrath and anger is the year of the Lord's wrath, the year of the Jehovah's wrath. And the cognate form is the word logos of God, theos, using Greek and English for Jehovah of the Elohim. It's in perfect symmetry. And so this is the time of the wrath in the year of the Lord's wrath, the last year of the last 7 years. Psalms 21:11 or 21:10. It says, their fruit thou shalt destroy from the earth. And here's the money line here. And their seed from among the children of men. There's a seed line that's going to be removed, and it's part of the analogy of the wheat and the tares.
Yeah.
It hits on a few different levels, but that's one of it. And there's an interesting prophecy in Daniel 2:43 in the metallic empires of the land time, of the end time, that talks about the 10 metallic kings of the end time empire. When I say metallic kings, not much metal left. It's earth, it's clay, and it's iron. The Roman Empire before was iron, and then you had bronze for Greece, and then you had silver with Persia, Medes, and gold with Babylon in Daniel 2, which is giving us the same kind of information as Daniel 7 gives in Revelation 12, 13, and 17, but they're using the beast allegories there for the beast empires, right? But it's the same 10 kings, 10 horns, 10 toes. So here's what it says there in the end time. And it says in 2:43, when it's talking about the iron and clay empire that's going to be partly strong and partly broken, it says, and whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. So we're going to have descendants of the metallic empires, of the beast empires, which are giants, or reappearance of giants that are going to mix their seed again in the end time, with this end time empire. And it's the same seed line as Psalms 21, Isaiah 14, and Genesis 3:15, and they're called the terrible ones, as I talked about earlier in Ezekiel 32. And we find out in Isaiah 25 that the branch of these terrible ones are going to be destroyed on a mountain in the end time, in the day of the Lord.
This sure is interesting. And I just want to add here very quickly, Gary, because there's a lot of people who are like, "Oof, I need to do some Bible studying." Yes, you do. Especially the
Yes.
parts that you feel uncomfortable with. If you read that in scripture, that is just a sign that you actually have to read it. Because the society today, we don't read what we don't really feel. We feel a bit strange, or we kind of skip it. We like the verses that we like, but that's not how we should worship God, right? We should read the Bible in a balanced way and not try to just change it to fit in with our lifestyles. We should change our lifestyles to fit in with the Bible. So go and read those verses, those passages that you have question marks about, and get these books of Gary Wayne. It goes into a lot more detail, but I don't think we're done here, Gary. I think we need to go into a little bit more depth and show how it's all connected with the Nephilim, the fallen angels, and the end times. What do you say?
Yeah, I think so too, because to understand the end time, you have to understand prehistory, because nothing is new under the sun. What was will be again. And believe me, we cannot imagine what's coming. We can try, but first of all, we have to get into the shoes of the people that were before us to understand what they saw. And so much of the allegory that's in end time prophecy is defined in prehistory. So just as I
Right.
made a connection to the Babylon religion, to Babel, to Enochian mysticism that was before the flood, it's things like that. So if you want to understand who the great and mighty men are in the book of Revelation, you have to learn about the Old Testament and prehistory. And then we have to understand that the New Testament is written in Greek versus Hebrew. So we have to look for cognate equal terms as I equate the word of God with Lord God or Jehovah of the Elohim. There are those terms that we can link, and we can match as we do that Old Testament prophecies with New Testament prophecies that are talking about the same things, and match that language.
Right. Yeah. 100% agree. Guys, in the meantime, while you wait for us, you can check out these videos here about the pre-flood, post-flood worlds. Gary, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time, guys. Remember, life is short, so do not waste yours.